Hey everybody, welcome back to the show in which we talk about your psychology, your problem. We all know what that problem is. Spoiler alert, your problem. I know exactly what it is. It is you. Right? Well, what else would it be? You have a money problem, you have a relationship problem, career problem. Oh, there's a problem with your business. Oh, you don't have enough money? I wonder if that's a reflection of your own psychology. I wonder if that's not just magnifying an issue with you and your psyche. Same thing with your business, same thing with your relation. That's why you don't want relationships. Your relationships show up and they just magnify exactly who you are. I mean, it's really a lot of fun to just blame that and say, oh, that's the problem. No, it's you. Your business, any issue with your business, it's an issue with you. What do you think the problem with Animus is? Is this a secret? Do I even have to say we have a difficult time communicating? I'm not that great at communicating. I'm working on it and I'm getting better. That's why I'm here talking to you every week. This is part of the communication. Why your psychology matters, how it's reflected on all these things. You have a problem with money, relationship. This is how about you and how you relate with yourself. Which isn't really new. I mean, what I'm basically saying there is take responsibility. I mean, Jocko Willink and Jordan Peterson can say that. Yeah, take responsibility, but how do you even do that? What are the mechanisms behind responsibility? Well, you got to face down your anxiety. This comes down to how well you manage your anxiety. Not get rid of. Notice I didn't say get rid of your anxiety. This is how well you manage your anxiety. Okay, so what is anxiety? Let's deconstruct that out. Okay. So then there's the Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink CBT, and then underneath that is the depth, the Jungian Freudian psychology. This comes down to how well you face yourself. Okay, so that's already been said, and I agree with a lot of the Jungian stuff. In fact, I disagree with very little of it. Well, maybe there's some ways in which it's interpreted in some respects. I would disagree with that. That's a big issue. In effect, I'm a Jungian, but let's go a step deeper than that. Let's go to an even deeper level than the Jungians go to and say, yeah, you're unconscious there. How well you take responsibility, for example, how well you manage your money, how well you manage your relationship is a reflection of you and your relationship with your unconscious, how well you create a capital S self. Okay, but there may be a structure for doing exactly that. Really, there may be a structure for managing your unconscious, which would mean a universal kind of therapy, a kind of therapy that anybody could go to and get exactly what you need out of therapy. Oh, people have different presenting problems. No, right? What was I just saying? That's just the presenting problem. The relationship is just the presenting problem. That's just a way for you to get at your own unconscious. Figure out how the relationship is a reflection of your unconscious, and that's the goal of therapy. So there's a way of doing this, and that's what we talk about here. Let's get at exactly what's going on. I think this can be very helpful, and it all, of course, comes down to how we relate with ourselves and how well Ohio State relates with itself. I know this game happened 3 weeks ago, but I haven't gotten a chance. I guess I could have talked about it 2 weeks ago or last week. I forgot. Okay. Again, maybe not the best communicator. That's what I'm working on this. So the Ohio State Clemson, I went to Ohio State. Ohio State fan. It's actually nice rooting for a team that does well sometimes, as opposed to just making yourself root for a team. So I'm like making myself root for the 49ers, and I feel myself not care that much as I'm trying to do it. But this Ohio State-Clemson game, from my perspective, Ohio State was the better team on the field, but they didn't think they were the better team, and that's why they lost. Everybody's blaming the refs, and this stupid rule, this targeting call. This is why I want to talk about it, because this is why it still matters, even though the game is 3 weeks old and it's college football, so it doesn't really matter anyways. And maybe you could argue, and it's football, so it doesn't really matter anyways. It's some kind of sport. No, it does matter. If we don't play football, then we're going to have World War III. Okay, you look at a society, how well they have organized sports and how violent those sports are is a direct reflection of the really crappy foreign policy. Tulsi Gabbard, she's against our foreign policy. I would largely agree. Okay, well, you want a more domestic, you want a less involved foreign policy. Well, we have to have organized competitive sports. So you smart guys out there can make fun of, oh, what's the point of football? It ultimately doesn't matter. It's ultimately pointless when you think about it. That old great Simpsons quotation when Homer's watching that great hits of the NFL tape. Or painful injuries. It was funnier than great hits anyway. Yeah, this is all a reflection of us and our and how we are with competitive sports. Why do you think the Olympics started up at the end of the most peaceful century, the 19th century? Well, we're not fighting each other. We got to fight each other in another way on the and track and field. And we got to see who jumps the furthest. I don't know. I mean, we still need Achilles to worship. We still need Achilles to look up to. That's an archetypal part of us, to go back to Jungian psychology. But how about they not be Achilles who go out and shoot people? How about the new Achilles is, in the case of long jump, I don't know, Carl Lewis, I guess. Right? That's a relevant reference. But what was I talking about? Oh, yeah, Ohio State, Clemson. I mean, this is just what happens when you have the right strategy, you have the right game plan, but your psychology just isn't there. You start making stupid mistakes. Well, first you start to get nervous and you start to make stupid mistakes, and then you call it self-sabotage as this thing that simply happens. No, self-sabotage, the word of the day is reflection. Self-sabotage is a reflection of your anxiety. You will self-sabotage to the extent that you have anxiety. And Ohio State just had more anxiety. We didn't feel like we really belonged there. We probably aren't as well run of a program as Clemson or a lot of other Southern schools. I mean, especially SEC schools. Glad we didn't play LSU. That probably wouldn't have been too pretty. That's why we don't really feel like we belong there, so we get nervous when we mess up. And when it's 3rd and long and you have a great shot at the quarterback, you get a targeting call. You could say the quarterback lowered his head. No, it does. You didn't execute that well because you were nervous. You got maybe too excited and you just messed it up because you don't feel like you belong there because you're a northern school playing football and the year is 2019. So just notice that when that happens in your life, when you're not getting what you want, even though you think you should, you just don't feel on some level like you belong there. And you got to face down the issue. To really get what you want, you got to face down your own issues. And that's not what Ohio State did very well. And I don't know how deep those issues go in Ohio State's athletic program. I mean, maybe they just know on some level that they're not a school from the South. They don't have as well run a program. They know on some level that they don't get their quarterbacks as prepared for the NFL as a team in the South would, as LSU did, as Clemson's doing for their quarterback. Just not a good as a program. And they know that on some level, and it makes itself known in these stupid errors that Ohio State does. But this goes back to you, right? What are the stupid errors that you're making? How do you self-sabotage? This comes back to you and how you see yourself, and how you see yourself is ultimately going to be how you face yourself. We're going to talk about that today, how it relates with one of my favorite albums of all time, though not from my favorite performer or singer or band. I mean, it's from Elvis, his Live from Memphis, 1974, what that has to do with writing your own myth. First, I want to talk about non-binary, gender fluid. This idea is gets thrown a lot now, and we're having new definitions for masculinity and femininity, and it's like somebody can be non-binary. But what do you notice about somebody who's non-binary? By the way, if you want to be non-binary or you want to be transgender, fine, go at it. But I do think that there's an epistemological error that's not just made in the non-binary party or the gender fluid party, but this has been an error that's been made, frequently throughout philosophy, throughout Western philosophy at the very least. I know Eastern philosophy too, even though I'm not as well versed in that. And it's another issue coming up here, and it matters in psychology because I think we see, somebody who is a mix of masculinity and femininity. I mean, what do you notice about non-binary gender fluid people is they're pretty androgynous, right? They look like Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt in Interview with the Vampire. Like, not exactly masculine, not exactly feminine. It's just like this ooze, this gray ooze of both genders. And I think that's an indication that what non-binary is, or how it's being interpreted now in the case of we have, new definitions for gender, it's not really non-binary. It's not an integration of masculinity and femininity. What it is like an enmeshment between the two. And we're going to get into this today when it comes to... Okay, I just realized I have way too many things to talk about today. Now I have 3 things to talk about. Well, me stalling is not going to help. Let's get through this non-binary thing. So you think, oh, here's this masculine guy who's integrated his feminine side. That means he's more girly. No, it actually makes him more masculine when he needs to be more masculine. And more, I guess you would say, feminine when the situation calls for that. We see these two things as polar opposites. And the way to integrate them, or what integration is some combining of them, but that's not really what it is. It's not combining. It's propitiating. It's appeasing. They each inform each other. So when you're a masculine guy and you integrate your femininity more, when you get more in touch with your emotions, then you become actually more masculine. In the case of masculinity and femininity, what's a strong predictor, or what's a good indication of masculinity is steadiness, not being easily ruffled. When something happens, you don't freak out. Well, where does this come from? Does this come from completely ignoring your emotions? Or does this come from accepting your emotions, being in touch with your emotions? There's a structure for how to do that, to go back to the intro. That's what we do here. Being more in touch with your emotions, so when something does happen and your emotions are triggered, you don't have to repress anything, but you're so comfortable with who you are up to that point. You're so comfortable with your emotions that you can feel them in that moment and it doesn't fluster you. Now you can repress your emotions, but that's only going to work in the short term, and that will come back to haunt you. That will come back in the form of, whatever your version is of a stupid targeting call or roughing the punter ball like Ohio State did. Analytical, intuitive. We see these as two opposites. Now, they are opposites in a sense. When you're being analytical, you're not really being intuitive. And when you're being intuitive, making an intuitive decision, you're not being analytical. But they're not opposites in how we actually practice them. I mean, when we think about them, without relation to the real world, then it seems like they're on polar opposites, but they're actually just two sides of the same coin. So how could being analytical make you more intuitive? Well, how would you be afraid of being intuitive? Making a quick decision in the moment based on the environment without thinking about it too much, but just going on your quote gut. It's not really your gut. It's just an accumulation of past experiences and your mind's doing some calculation that you're not aware of. How would being analytical help you in that situation? Well, if you made the wrong decision, right? You're going to be much more likely to be intuitive if you trust yourself to be analytical about it later. And if it didn't work out, ask yourself why. Analyze the situation. I thought this girl was a good situation for me, but then it wasn't. I wonder what it was. Oh yeah, she had a tattoo of a dagger on her chest. That was maybe a good indication that it wasn't. And then being analytical about it informs your intuition. These two things propitiate each other. If you want to be a masculine guy, or if you want to be a feminine woman, you really got to integrate the opposite. And we're afraid because it means I'm going to be more girly if I'm a guy, or I'm going to be more masculine and hardened if I'm a woman. But it's actually not the case. You're becoming more feminine. Okay, so yeah, I guess I didn't give an example of that. So let's say you're a feminine woman and your femininity is important to you. How would you integrate your animus to make yourself more feminine? I mean, in a sense, what you would do is understand what you're doing, understanding the power of femininity, understanding the context in which it is more acceptable will make you more feminine. I mean, if you're feminine all the time, it's just going to come off like you're a little girl who was abused when you were 8. But you have to get some perspective. You have to understand the power of femininity and when to use it, what context would be good for it. And that would be then that would in turn make you more feminine. The ultimate result of that is finding a guy, recognizing your animus in him, seeing his maybe more dominant, not domineering, but more dominant behavior as something that's going to be complementary to you. And I would say the same thing for a man, reason and emotion. We think that if you're both reasonable and emotional, then you're going to be this gray ooze of reason and emotion, and you're not going to be able to use your reason or your emotions correctly. But of course, when you understand these things as not opposites, as not things that necessarily pull at each other, but propitiate each other, and you can go, okay, well, how do I be more emotional? Well, I understand what my emotions are, first of all. Got to do that. And then I can regulate my emotions, and then that puts me on a higher psychological plane from which I can use my reason in a more productive way. Reason without a regulation, I've said this a million times, is rationalization. If you don't manage your emotions, you think you're going to be reasoning. You think you're going to be using your reason, but really it's going to be rationalizing your decisions, justifying yourself. This is a big one today, science versus religion. You can't be in favor of both science and religion. And then if we do combine these, then there seems to be like this gray ooze in between. You're both scientific and religious, meaning you're not really that great of a scientist, and you're not really that religious if you are scientific. But when we understand how science has a certain place in our epistemology, and how religion, small r religion, not religious myself, personally, how you typically call it religious, but how small r religion has a place in our epistemology, getting us to regulate our emotions, create a ritual around regulation, then we can see, again, to go back to the reason versus emotions. You just see these two things as again, different sides of the same coin, not opposites, and we have to find some happy medium. No. The better you get at becoming small r religious, the better you are at science. Because now you're not relying on the science to be religious. And vice versa, now you're not relying on the religion to be scientific. That wasn't the point of religion in the first place. Oh, and I had that to talk about. Yeah, I'm not getting a lot of things today. Same thing with bold and modest. Like, you can be either bold and modest. This is, again, false dichotomy. It just doesn't exist. It's just like the more bold you are, the more modest you can be. I mean, if you're just bold all the time, people won't believe you. And if you're just modest all the time, people won't believe you. Same thing with opinionated, easygoing. You can either be one or the other. And to be both, there's some enmeshment of the two. But really, the more opinionated you are about one area, the more easygoing you can be about another area. Because now you're not afraid of people pushing you around if people know that you can have firm opinions on something. And yeah, of course, if you're just opinionated all the time, people aren't going to believe your opinions anyways. They're just think, oh, that's Mark being opinionated because that's who he is. He's not really saying that because he believes it. He's just saying that because whatever, he's being disagreeable. That's part of his personality. Well, not exactly true. And so that's it, but this ultimately comes down to your masculinity and your femininity. We have this notion that being non-binary is this ooze, this androgynous ooze between the two. And that's just not a healthy integration of your masculinity and femininity. You got to be able to exercise of both of these qualities in you without one not only not interfering with the other, but with each helping each other. Like, if you're a masculine guy and you have these qualities of masculinity, if you know that you are, in a sense, an individual unto yourself, to the extent that you have an identity, to the extent that you chose that identity by regulating your emotions, then getting lost in your emotions to some degree, it's just not going to matter to you because you're not afraid of it. Just like you're not afraid of being intuitive if you can trust yourself to be analytical about it later. Or you're not afraid of being analytical if you can trust yourself, when you need to. You're not going to get lost in that super cerebral, top-down way of thinking. You're not going to get lost there out into space. Because you can trust yourself to go back to being analytical again. That's really the most important thing. And I think this goes right into, this is a good introduction to your myth. the myth that you create for yourself, the story that you tell yourself about your life. Of course, you've heard this before. We all tell ourselves a story about who we are and how we're developing. But creating your own myth, and this goes back to narrative therapy, which really started with Jung, but creating your own myth is a way to take control of your narrative and to see who you are. And so when you can see who you are it's easier to see where you need to go and what you need to do with your life. And this goes back to Elvis Presley live from Memphis, because this is a live concert. I highly suggest you go listen to it. I mean, it is really sad in a sense. It is mostly sad, especially when you know how Elvis ended up 2 years later, or maybe 3 years later. But this is a guy who's, I think he's 40 at this point. He just turned 40. He's fat. He's out of shape. He's not what he used to be. And he's doing the default myth. He is singing out a default myth. He is telling himself implicitly while creating this concert a default myth that we all tell ourselves. And that's why it's important to go in and create your own myth. He is trying to get back what he once was. He's not trying to use his past. He's not trying to learn from it or integrate it and use his past, but you put it through the mechanisms of his psychology to create a better future for himself. He is just looking at his past in a sense, and he's trying to get it back. And he knows, and you can just feel it. Maybe this is just me, knowing what we know now about how Elvis ended up, pants down around his ankles on the toilet, watching the television, I think. Oh no, maybe that's the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon. Okay. So the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon infused both those stories about Elvis. He shot a gun at a television and he died on the toilet. But in the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, he shot a gun at a television while he was on the toilet. But yeah, Elvis is just trying to get back what he once was. He's not trying to integrate it into his psyche and become something even better because of it. This is how we get our development wrong. And everybody's out there talking to you about mindset and choose your goals and live the life that you dream, dream your life and then live it. It's not going to happen. I can tell you it's not going to happen because of what we were just talking about at the beginning of the show. Because of you. Because you're your own problem. But one way to manage you, one way to get yourself right in a sense, is to look at your unconscious. And in the case of writing your own myth, of creating your own myth, you look at your past. You look at Act 1. What are the problems that you faced? And I think it's really important to write this out as like 5 milestones that you faced. So let's say, I came from a dysfunctional family, or my father was an alcoholic, or maybe I had alcohol problems, or I was really afraid of girls. That's one milestone that's in my myth. Couldn't talk to girls. Not necessarily bad at girls, to be honest. I think guys try to make themselves seem even worse than they were with girls. I wasn't, just not great. If there was a girl who I really wanted to talk to, I just couldn't feel like, who am I to go talk to her? I just didn't feel like I had the right to do that. So what are the problems that you are facing? Again, this goes back to, you're not going to get to where you want to go, to where you really want to go, until you can really begin to face who you are. And then Act 2 would be, how exactly do you face these problems? How are you facing these problems? And even if you're not facing the problems right now, like, you still have to write it out. Like, people have said, act like you're in your own movie. Like, let's say you're the hero of your own movie. How would you act? That's not exactly correct. It's, if your life was a movie, how would it unfold? Given everything that happened, and you knew that this was not going to end up as a tragedy. Given everything that happened, what would necessarily need to happen? What would be a good plot to this movie? What would be the scenes from your childhood that they would include in this movie? Goes back to milestones. How would this person face it? How would they integrate this? Okay, so your dad wasn't nice to you. How would this look? How would this look? You facing the issue and then you resolving the issue. Because like Elvis and, live from Memphis, your dad's never going to be nice to you. If your dad wasn't nice to you when you're 7, you're not going back to when you were 7 and having your dad be nice to you. That's not how this works. Otherwise, it just becomes sad and you know it's never going to happen, like Elvis in 1974. But how this does work is you say, oh, okay, what happened in Act 1? My dad wasn't nice to me. Okay, now what's going to happen in Act 2? Well, I'm going to face that down. I'm going to face that issue for exactly what it is and see how it affected me. Not how it's my dad's responsibility, of course, but how it's affecting me now, and how it affects me now is my responsibility. Okay, so what do I do with this? Well, maybe I'm nicer to my kid. There's tons of things you can do. Maybe I now treat my father actually how I wanted to be treated when I was 7. He was unable to do it, but now I can do it. I have enough emotional wherewithal, because you're watching the show to get emotional wherewithal. Now I can, go back and do it. And so Act 3 is looking back, being nice to your dad, seeing what this does to you now, and say, well, good thing I had that problem. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had awareness of this issue, and now I have my own son, and maybe I would have been mean to him without knowing it. But because I brought awareness, because I faced my unconscious, because I faced the past, which is the unconscious of the myth. Act 1, right? That's you still in your unconscious your unconscious way of being. Act 2 is actually going into your unconscious, but you're no longer unconscious. Two different definitions of that word. And you need to write this out. Otherwise, you're living out some story. I don't know what it is. But until you actually take control and look, what are the 5 problems that I had from 0 to 18? How do I look at these? How do I talk about them? How do I, most importantly, take responsibility for them? How do I want to hold on to these to get my payoff? To put myself in that emotional state that's effectively a drug. And as far as we can tell, as much as we know about neuroscience, is powerful as any drug, perhaps even more powerful. That's your heroin, going back, being a victim, having self-pity. We talk about myth all the time, and the one that I always bring up, which the one that Jung brings up at least sometimes, is Philoctetes. I was about to say it both ways that I know to say it. Philoctetes. Right, he was abandoned on that island in the Iliad, and then they had because he had that festering wound, and then the Greeks fighting had to go back and get Philoctetes because they needed his arrows, in a sense saying, we needed your trauma. So it's a good thing that Philoctetes had that trauma, otherwise he couldn't make something useful out of it. He couldn't provide for the arrow to kill, is that how it worked? I think one of his arrows killed somebody. It wasn't Achilles. I don't know it that well, I guess. It doesn't matter. The point is, you have these wounds. You have to look at the wounds and you have to make sense out of them. Otherwise, you will live them out unconsciously, and you will end up somewhere when you're 60, 65, 70, where it's going to be too late to do anything about it. Not that being 70 is necessarily too late to do anything about these. But we got to be honest about this. At some point, you get to a point in your life where it's too late. And you just don't have the wherewithal at that point, like Elvis when he was 40. And he just didn't know how to integrate like all this stuff that he lost. And he's just, okay, let's get it back. I'm going to go back up in my suit and I'm going to sing I'm going to sing all these old songs that I used to sing, even though I'm fat and it's disgusting and nobody's really going to tell me what's going on because I'm Elvis. And it just becomes sad, and you're never going to be able to get it back. So what happened in the past? 5 things that happened, 10 things, whatever. What happened in the past? Those are past milestones. Now, what would need to happen in the future for you to integrate the past? Don't be like Elvis. Elvis probably had a goal. He was like, I'm going to do this live from Memphis thing and it's going to be great. And no, Elvis, it doesn't work that way. You got to look at what you're avoiding. You got to look at your unconscious. Otherwise, you're never going to really get what you want. And just getting the path back, going back to when you were 7, when your dad was nice to you, that's not really what you wanted anyways. I mean, if you actually did get that, you would just feel sick. And this is a great indication of what you do want. You may not even know what you want. Well, a great way to look at what you want is to look at your past and deconstruct it like a screenwriter would, for instance, or a director. Okay, here's what happened from 0 to 18 in this person's life. What could he do because of this? What could he do to make sense out of this? Again, not to get back, not to get anything back, not to create a balance, right? Like the non-binary thing, but to actually integrate it. And I think these are questions that we really need to ask ourselves if we want to have the life that we want. I mean, if you're doing something to make your parents happy, you're still in this act one, right? You just haven't really looked at your unconscious. You haven't not looked at the past for what it is to fully separate from it. And that's what we're going to get into now, the difference between separation and connection. So oftentimes in this podcast, the first stage, we were just talking about the first stage in your development, in your adult emotional, psychological development is going to be separation. Predominantly separation from the parents as represented as authority figures, but this could be separation from any kind of authority figure. No longer tying your identity to somebody else. Creating your own identity based on what you want, not as a reaction, not as a getting back, not as a compensation for how you were raised or how your relationships are now, but as an integration of it in a sense. And so I think the huge myth here is that simply maybe moving away, or let's say you move somewhere to college to get away from your parents, like this is going to separate you from them psychologically. It may help. And of course, if you're still living at home and you're 25 and you don't want to move out because it's going to hurt your mom's feelings, then okay, moving out, separating physically is one way to aid in the psychological separation. But ultimately, this is about separating psychologically, not creating a connection. The only way that you can really create a connection, an honest connection with your parents or with an authority figure, is to separate from them. Is to, in a sense, create your own identity apart from them. I mean, it's like, a merger between two companies. How could two companies come together to merge? Well, I would imagine, I haven't been part of a company merger, but I would imagine at that point, and they are both have their own identity, and they both do something well that the other company doesn't do well, but the other company needs, so they decide to merge. But they only get to that place of the merger, of the connection, because they know exactly who they are. And the other company knows exactly who they are. And this is what separation is from your parents. You think you're separated from your parents because you've moved away or you don't think about them anymore. No, you're lugging them around. You are living out the unconscious myth of your parents at that point because you haven't looked at your own act one. You separate by creating a connection, and you create a connection through separation. If you just have your mom and your dad in your unconscious, in your act one in your life, and you're lugging them around, that's not a connection, and that's not separation. Now, in the sense, that's a connection of a 4-year-old or an infant to his parents, but it's not the connection of anybody older than 15, at least past puberty. So how do you separate? Well, pretty much what I've been saying. This comes down to you and your identity. How do you separate from yourself? How do you separate from your own unconsciousness? How do you see your unconscious for what it is you face it. You look exactly at what's going on in your unconscious and you face it down. And you, in a sense, take responsibility for it. Again, here at Animus, we have a specific structure for doing exactly that. Nobody's ever developed anything close to this before. So how would you separate from your parents? Well, it's the same thing. In a sense, take your unconscious and let it be known to them. Preferably not before you let it be known to yourself, right? This is the point of therapy. We work on these issues in therapy so you can go out and take your unconscious to the world and, integrate it in the world in an appropriate way. You take, a lot of us in our shadow, our sexuality, our sexuality is bad. Okay, well, you don't go out and, say crude things to women because of that. That's making your unconscious be known, but not in a really helpful way. So part of therapy is getting used to these things. So what are you hiding from your parents? What are you hiding from your mom, your dad, any sort of authority figure, any uncle? You take that and you let that be known. And then you look at it like you would a myth, to go back to that. Okay, this is what this person was hiding in Act 1 of their life. How do they not just get this back? How do they not just compensate for it? Okay, by being more honest about it. But what does this look like in the future? So maybe it was, I always needed my father's approval. Well, the solution to that isn't, now I no longer need my father's approval. I don't care about what he thinks. I don't care about anything, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to move away for college and not think about it ever again. Integrating that, doing the proper non-binary. It's really binary, but an integration of the both. It's fully binary, but an integration would be, okay, how do I use this so I need approval from my father. Yeah, sorry, got off track. I need approval from my father. Okay, how do I become the one in the relationship where I give approval to him? How does my identity develop to get to that point? How to express who you are to them. How to let them know exactly what you're going through. Take the unconscious and make it known to them. This is a connection. You are connecting in a way, and this is a separation. Yeah, another non-binary seeming dichotomy. Separation, confrontation and connection. We have this view of connection, how it's just this feminine lovey-dovey, let's all hold hands and go to a cuddle party. I saw that on Twitter this week, these male cuddle parties. We see this as the only way of connection, but there's another way to connect, and that is through confrontation. That's exactly what a confrontation is. When you understand what your psychology is, when you understand what a connection is, letting your unconscious be known in a helpful way. It's just a different flavor of a connection. And be confrontational with somebody and tell me you don't feel more connected with them afterwards. This is how we do it. Separation is connection. It's not like, you want me to connect more with my parents? But wait, I've been trying to separate from my parents. No, you've been trying to forget about your parents. You've been trying to Elvis Live from Memphis 1974 your parents. You haven't been trying to philoctetes your parents. They didn't pick up philoctetes and go, we'll help you heal your wound. Let's come back and you can be part of we'll go and take Troy. No, it was, philoctetes, we actually need this. This skill that you had, this information in your wounds, we needed that. Good thing you went through your Act 1 philoctetes of getting this wound. I forget. Never actually read the Iliad, just the Odyssey. We forget exactly, what. Don't forget what you went through. Yeah, in Act 1. God, good thing you went through that. Good thing you went through milestone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Act 1. Now you got to work on it. Now you have something to do. Now it goes back to what I was talking about with Dr. Hollis a couple weeks ago. Now you can create meaning. And then through that creation of the meaning, you can go on to create, it's not just 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 11. But this only comes through understanding your emotions and what exactly they are and how to work through them. And that's exactly what we talk about here at Animus. And what this amounts to is you going through therapy, you getting a full therapeutic treatment. I mean, I say 10 years of therapy, it's more than 10 years. Because you don't get a lot of these kind of ideas in therapy. It's like, go in and talk about your problems and you don't really get anywhere. You don't really understand them. You can't encapsulate them. But we all go through the same thing. Again, to go back to what I was talking about at the beginning, we all different problems, but it's just a reflection of us. It's just a reflection of who we are, of our own issues, and we all have the same issues because we all have the same two emotions, right? Not feeling states, but emotions. And I hope I just gave you some tools to help you work on these and just to help you think about your situation, about separation and connection. I mean, where are you, Ohio State? Where do you go in and you're clearly the better team, but you mess it up for yourself because of anxiety, because you haven't faced down your unconscious for really what it was. So you find yourself in a big game and you get all flustered. Where do you find yourself trying to be like Elvis, live from Memphis, 1974? That's never going to work. It is just going to lead to suffering. You say, oh, when is this going to end? Oh, I've been facing my problems forever. When's it going to end? You're trying to get it back. There's nothing to get back. It's never going to work that way. And I think the one thing that integrates all these things that we've been talking about today is, the writing out of your own myth. This is one part of the therapy course that I offer online, a way to go through therapy. You have to write out who you are, exactly who you are now, and where you're going, who you're going to be. And of course, that the whole myth encapsulates your identity. It's just like this changing, flowing, increasing, becoming thing. You're telling yourself a story already, might as well make it one that you want to be, one that you want to tell yourself. And I'll leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this has been helpful. I mean, it's the same issue. We talk about the same issue every week, just doing it in a little bit different way. So let me know what you're into. Animus at animusempire.com. I could do more like I did last week of summarizing, talking about the main themes in a book that I think is really important, but I know you guys won't read. Not because you're not smart, again, just because you have better things to do on your weekend. Some of us may not. I don't know. So let me know if you want to do more. I could do more Jung books. I could do other psychology books. I could do Nietzsche too, if you're interested in that. I think I'm well versed enough in Nietzsche to cover some of his books. But yeah, let me know. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, Animus at animusempire.com. And as always, I wish you pain and joy that comes from being in touch with reality.